What's going on, Salt Strong Nation? It is the heat of summer, and me and Justin are here to talk to you guys today about the number one thing you need to take into consideration and implement when you're going fishing if you want to have success. Catch a lot of redfish, catch a lot of trout, flounder, snook, any inshore game fish that we're after in the shallow flats. This is something you need to keep in mind. Justin, how are you doing today, man?
Pretty good, my man. What's up with you?
Oh, nothing much. Just ready to talk about a tip that I think is really going to help folks efficiently fish in the summer and just kind of make the most of what they're doing out on the water, because this is something I didn't really take into consideration when I first started fishing. And that's really just water temperature and DO2. Now, we'll just go ahead and dive straight into it. You know, in the summertime, we know it's hot. And as we talk about in a lot of our introductory mastery courses, such as the Finding Spots Mastery, the Inshore Fishing Mastery, as that water temperature rises in the summertime, DO2 levels tend to drop. And we're going to dive into some very interesting facts you shared with me before we hopped on the call. But we also know that that really hot water temperature, being that fish are cold-blooded, they can't regulate their own body temperature, they are subject to external factors. And that's going to really take a hit on how active they are, what they're feeding on, where they're going to feed, and all of the different presentations that we make in shallow water and what we can do to really maximize our strategies and our presentations to get the most out of our early fishing. So I want to ask you really quickly, when you're going out for a summer fishing trip, what time window, and this is kind of, I'm leading the question here, what time windows are you looking at to have your best fishing throughout the day?
Yeah, so that's the first thing, we want to hammer home is just like with all the courses and things that we have to help you maximize your efforts on the water in your pre-planning side of things, fishing in the summertime is all about timing. It really is. And what we talked about, and the whole point of this call is your window of opportunity is less in the summertime to maximize your efforts. And I get out super early. Like I'm an hour and a half from anywhere on the coast, east or west coast. I'm centrally located in Orlando, and I'm oftentimes on the road at 4:30 in the morning to be able to get over to the East Coast where the sun's rising on the East Coast at 5:30. Getting my gear ready, my kayak, or hopping on a friend's boat sometime between 5:30 and 6 a.m. And even fishing friends that I know look at me and roll their eyes and say, "Oh, that's so early." But you really have to be out early in the summertime, not just because that early twilight bite where the sun's just barely creeping up is really, really good, but because you and I and most fishermen know that window of opportunity is going to shut down by like 9:30, maybe 10 o'clock if you have some cloud cover, or if it's a little windier, and there's some other things to consider. But on a traditional summer day where the sun is glaring down and it's getting hot really quick, the fish are going to turn off and we're going to turn off. You're going to be drenched in sweat, probably going to start getting sunburn at 9, 10 a.m. And it's not like the rest of the year. So this summer window, timing is everything, and maximizing your efforts is everything. And that's what we want to go into. Is you talked about dissolved oxygen. And I kind of just want to segue into that. Dissolved oxygen, yes, the hotter that it gets, the lower that dissolved oxygen is going to be, but there's more factors to consider. The type of bottom that you're fishing has a lot to do with what that dissolved oxygen is going to be as well. In muddy, sandy areas, and especially in dirty water, that water is going to get really hot, and there's really nothing putting oxygen back into the water. So your dissolved oxygen is going to drop because everything that's living in that area is going to be consuming oxygen at the same rate, if not faster, and nothing is offsetting it, if you will. But over a grass flat in the summertime, it could be 12 or 1 in the afternoon. That grass there's photosynthesis going on. The grass is putting oxygen back into the water, but the water temperature is still really high. I mean, it could be mid to high 80s. I've had days where it's even 90 degrees looking at my fish finder, and it's really, really sunny, and it's really, really hot. And you said these fish are cold-blooded. They'll feed based on their external surroundings and what the environment is. And if it's ideal, in the low 80s, high 70s would be, I'm sure, ideal. But low 80s, these fish are feeding aggressively. And when it gets to that 85, 6, 7, 8, they're pretty lethargic. They want to go, they want to find a shaded, cooler area to either ambush prey or just relax and turn off for a couple hours, just like we would, right? Like we wouldn't want to be out there when the sun's blaring and it's super hot and there's no wind and our eyes are burning. We have eyelids. Fish don't have eyelids. So that intense sun is probably really bothersome. So even though there could be a high dissolved oxygen level where there's a lot of seagrass on a grass flat, if you're over mud or areas where there isn't, and there isn't anything adding oxygen back in, that's one thing against you. But just the sunlight, the intense sunlight, and the temperature of the water is going to turn those fish off. And they're just going to shift gears to where even if we found them, they're not going to be feeding like they were in that sweet 3 to 4 hour window that you really should focus on getting out at.
Yeah, no, you made some really good points there, especially on the bottom content, because, we think about how the sun is going to be putting heat into the water, that light goes in. If there's nothing to absorb, if you're over sand, I've found that the temperature doesn't get up over sand as high, but you mentioned, fish don't have eyelids. If it's bright white sand, it's not going to be very easy for them to feed. Now, over grass, the DO2 levels might be right. They might actually be higher, as you mentioned before the call, than they would be, earlier on in the day because there's more photosynthesis occurring. But that grass is, it's dark. It's going to absorb more heat. The temperature is going to be what forces those fish off the flat, not the DO2. So we're constantly going to be looking for things that are going to allow fish to feed in warm water scenarios. That's really the biggest thing that we want to cover in this podcast or this tea time, is that we need to be looking at what we can do to find feeding windows in warm weather, really, really warm weather, because there's low wind days in this late summer period that we're in right now. There's not a whole lot of cloud cover. There's not a lot of rain showers that are coming through. We've pretty much been through the rainy season in most of the areas that are, listening to this tea time, Texas, Florida, all the way up to the Carolinas. Our rainy season is pretty much over. So it's a lot of just really hot days with no cloud cover, no wind, and the window to get after those fish is dusk and dawn. And there's no question about that. You need to be out at your spot before the sun even rises. If that sun is already breaking the horizon, you've lost considerable fishing time. You're able to, if you get out there before the sun is up, and if you're out there as it starts to set, and even fishing after it has set in the evening can be productive. Just anywhere that there's a significant temperature change in a cooling trend, and that's very good. Or if you're coming off of a cooling trend, I would say, and Justin, I'm curious on your opinion, is this, the morning bite for me in the summertime tends to be better because I think all throughout the night, that water has time to cool off. That sun's been hitting it all day, then it sets and it cools throughout the night. Now, I find the mornings really good because you've got extremely cool water, and now those fish that, need some light to be able to see their prey can start feeding a little bit better. And we'll briefly touch on tackle a little bit later, but I find that when you first start to get those little inklings of light, even before the sun breaks the horizon, just enough to put some light on the surface of the water where fish can see contrast above their heads, that can really fire up a bite. You see fish keying in on any kind of vibration in the water, bait breaking the surface, things like that. And as I touched on, with little to no winds late this time in the year, it can really make finding fish easy if you're out there at first light. They don't know they can't see you. There's no shadows, things like that. There's a lot of opportunities to sneak up on fish and get really close up on them. So I'm curious, do you prefer that morning bite or do you prefer the evening bite? I know that dusk and dawn are really the big focus here, but is there one that you believe is better than the other?
I see the logic in the morning bite being superior because you have all of those hours of darkness and consistency. In terms of lowering that water temperature or staying at a regulated temperature because you're not having the sun, spike that temp up in the middle of the day. I'm a big advocate of believing that nothing good happens fast in nature. So the frame of like 1 or 2 in the afternoon to 6, 7 o'clock at night, that's only 4 or 5 hours or so of the water temperature cooling down. The sun's still out. And the rate at which that cools is much, much slower. So there is an opportunity for a decent bite at dusk as the sun's going down and we've got a little bit of a cooling period. But the cooling period through the night hours, 7:30, 8 o'clock until 6 a.m. is much, much longer. So you're going to hit this equilibrium, if you will, where that temperature is going to kind of flatline and maintain for a long period of time. And then that sun's going to creep up, and that's going to be the trigger to get fish to start feeding because they've had time to relax and sleep, if you will. I don't think fish sleep, but relax in preparation for their next big meal, as opposed to like, I need to eat because my opportunity is a much shorter window, if you will. I've had in the summertime, I'm a big tarpon fanatic, so I'm fishing off the beach a lot. And there is a good evening, window of 1 or 2 hours of fishing for these guys off the beach from land. It's pretty crazy. But for flats fishing, I'd still prefer a morning bite. And I think that to your point, the longer period of time you have at cooler water temperatures through the night, and then with that sunrise, that 3-4 hours of productivity on the water is probably going to be greater in the morning than it is in the evening. And that's just taking into consideration all these variables we're talking about. Plus, I want to get back. I want to clean my kayak and my gear and have the rest of the day. I don't want to go fish, come back, and have dinner and go to sleep and then have to clean up tomorrow. That's my logic. But I think both are good. I think the important thing to consider is that even if you only have one window, morning or evening, if you only have an evening bite per se, it's still going to be productive. They're still going to have that temperature drop a little bit. Sun's going to go down and not be as intense. And the opportunity for you to go and be successful is there. But again, it is a shorter window in the summertime than any other season. I mean, winter is different. Like winter, we're going to get out at 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, and we're going to fish until 5 or 6 in the afternoon, with 3, 4 o'clock being the best time because the sun's been baking the water. It's opposite. In the summertime, much, much shorter window. It's 3, maybe 4 hours of magical fishing, and then 6 to 8 hours of just dead heat. The summer doldrums, if you will.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, it's very interesting to think about, how fish are feeding. The eyelids example that you gave is really great. It's not just temperature. It's not just DO2. It's also about what these fish can see. And we think about how they move up into shallow water. Obviously, fish, we catch a lot of them in deeper water as well, but it seems like fish move up to shallow water because it's easier for them to feed. And we see it, in those twilight periods. I've had some of my best success recently throwing top water in just a couple inches, for redfish. It's very interesting how this shift in temperature and the time that these fish are feeding can change our presentations because, during the spring, I was not throwing top water in a couple inches. I was throwing my paddle tails. I was throwing my jerk baits. It was a different story, but I'm fishing a little bit earlier and I need something that's going to get the attention of these fish because they're so fired up. This is, again, that small window. They're aggressively feeding on the shoreline. I'm seeing redfish crawling after shrimp. Their backs are out of the water, all this stuff. It's really wild to see how their feeding opportunities change, where they're going to be and what time they're doing it. And that's going to affect our tackle as well. So like I said, I've been throwing a lot of top waters. This is not one I've been throwing. I've pretty much essentially just been throwing that Moonwalker. It's on a rod downstairs, so I don't have it with me right now. But that's worked really well in these shallow water opportunities for these fish because it's got those single end lines. A lot of time, those hooks are literally dragging the bottom for these fish, and they come up, they wake on it. You can see them charging it from 5-6 feet away. It's really fun fishing, but we think about why this is productive. Like you said, fish don't have eyelids. They're going to be feeding in these low light periods because that's when they can see, that's when they can feel things that it's, not too hard on their bodies to be up there feeding. So the top water is great to get a lot of vibration, get the attention of those fish that are already, giving their all in that short window of time to eat what they can. Later on in the day, I will say that you definitely can catch fish. I was catching trout yesterday at noon, but it's very deep water. The bite is a lot tougher. I would say that, I'm off the water, 9 o'clock, 9:30, like you said. But there is a very small window after that topwater bite kind of dies down from like 8:30 to 8:45, 9 o'clock that you can get some really good sight fishing in as well. And that's usually when I'm going to be using my paddle tails. I'm looking, the sun doesn't cast a really hard shadow on my back to where I'm going to be spooking fish off a little bit further away. But we talked, on the call, we talked before the call about, how our tackle choices really just need to be efficient search baits. And that's something that I think if we can hammer home in terms of, tackle choices to everybody, because the focus of this is really just get out there and fish early and be efficient with your time. But we can't have this talk without mentioning tackle. So the top waters are great for covering ground. Once you find the fish and you need to get their attention, top waters work. But once that sun gets up a little bit higher, they might start moving just slightly deeper, even if it's just a foot. And you can find those top waters don't work as well. That's when I'm just burning paddle tails, trying to cover as much ground, find those feeding fish. And I would say that those are the only two lures that I'm using just in terms of efficiency. Like you said, we've got a much shorter window to catch the fish or have a hot bite on catching fish. So I'm just throwing the top waters and paddle tails, but I'm curious, what are you throwing in these, early summer morning or late evening summer scenarios?
I'm with you on that. A lot of it, like top waters here. I've got a rod set up next to me. Right now, I'm going to have, a gold digger on this is a 1/4 ounce jig head, but different size jig heads depending on depth. I'm going to have a gold digger and a Slam Shady 2.0 rigged on 2 different rods. That I'm going to have a light and a dark presentation paddle tail. And top water as well is probably going to be my third until that sun, gets up a little bit higher, 8:30, 9 o'clock. And then maybe I'll switch to a bomber, a bigger profile. But a lot of it does have to do with where I'm fishing. If I know that I can fish an area where I can actively see feeding an active redfish or trout busting on the surface, and I know that there's fish there, then I'll dissect an area with a jerkbait like an Alabama leprechaun. But we're hammering home the idea that it is a window of finding fish and trying to be productive with your efforts. And if you've got that 3-4 hour window, I'm all about search baits, because I want to make sure that I have the maximum number of times. You're only going to catch fish when a lure is in the water. And I had a good friend tell me in preparing for a tournament that he's like, I don't necessarily, if I'm fishing an area where I can't see the redfish or the trout and I don't know exactly if they're there, but they're in general in this area, he's like, I just want to cast more than the guy next to me, because the more opportunities you have that lure in the water moving and working, the better your chances are of getting a fish. And that concept works year round, but right now you need to tell yourself in preparation when you're going to go fish that I have a window of opportunity to maximize in, and it is smaller than any other time. And the best way to maximize your efforts in terms of a search lure and something that's proven to just catch a lot of fish is a paddle tail. So I'll always go out in the summer months with a light color and a dark color profile paddle tail and just cover a lot of ground. If I'm fishing an area where I don't know exactly where the fish are, but they could be at this general point or this slight drop off or this open expansive flat, and I can't see them or know that they're in this smaller area that I can dissect, it's all about searching, and I will bomb cast paddle tails till my arm falls off. I'll switch up to the bomber. I like using the bomber a lot. It's a bigger profile, so I can get a little further distance. And if I'm not going to use a topwater, like if I don't want to run the risk of fish just coming up and busting at a lure and missing it, I'll go to a bomber, because I know that if a big trout hits a bomber, they're going to engulf it. And it's a great low light scenario lure. I don't have a bomber in front of me right now, but the Slam Shady bomber is a 5-inch paddle tail that we sell on our shop page, fishstrong.com. Same color as Slam Shady, but that 5-inch and that really big boot tail to it. If you want an alternative to topwater, you can take the same owner twist lock hook that you use on the Slam Shady 2.0 or the Gold Digger or the Alabama Leprechaun. You can use that same hook and just slow retrieve that bomber just below the surface to kind of create a wake bait, so to speak, but that paddle tail bumping just below the surface. Those trout or redfish that might come up and aggressively strike a topwater, and you may miss that strike. If you don't want to miss it, or you just want a single hook connection with just one single weedless hook, I go with the bomber. That's my alternative. I mix it up. I think I just like catching fish on different lures. If I'm fishing consistently and I'm having a lot of short strikes on topwater, I'll go to the bomber. But for most scenarios, I'll start with a topwater lure. And then I'll only switch to the bomber if I feel like I'm getting strikes and I'm not hooking up. And I want that same type of lure approach. if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. And, we are starting to get later on in the year, those bait fish that hatched in the spring, they're starting to get really big. And it seems like some of the larger fish are keying in on bigger bait profiles. That's what I was throwing for those trout really late on in the day. We talk about how trout can be kind of tough to get on a bite, past that, especially later than redfish, past that, 9, 10 o'clock time frame. But that bomber, man, there's something about a bigger bait profile, especially if those fish, maybe they did try to feed early in the morning and they struck out. Not every hunting opportunity is guaranteed for those fish. So yes, you can find them. The percentages are a little bit lower. I would say that you are still better off targeting them in the morning. But that bomber can definitely pull strikes from redfish and trout just because it's a high calorie meal that's hard for them to resist if it goes by their face, if you're in the right spot. It's just one of those baits that you can cover a lot of ground with. And this time of year, it's an irresistible profile. It's only going to get better as we get into the fall as well. That's going to be the standard for me. I'm going to stop throwing my 3 and 4 inch paddle tails as we get later on into the season. We are talking, this is a late summer tea time, but fall is right around the corner. So it doesn't hurt to be throwing those larger paddle tails. And that's going to eventually become the standard here in probably 4 or 5 weeks. So that's something to definitely stock up on if you guys don't have a lot of those, is those bombers. And again, you get those at 20% off if you are a Salt Strong Insider at fishstrong.com. Also, if you guys need those moonwalkers we talked about earlier, we got them too. So definitely check those out. But is there anything that we missed out on in terms of, tackle or tactics, anything that these folks need to know for early summer fishing, Justin?
Yeah, well, I thought, guys, have suntan lotion for your face. Like, Wyatt is known for getting burnt a lot. I've gotten burnt a lot. I'm kind of blending. I'm half Puerto Rican, so this is blending a little bit. But suntan lotion is important year round. Don't get me wrong. We're covered head to toe. We got long sleeve shirts. I wear long pants when I fish because I don't want to burn my legs. I usually have a hood and a buff to cover, and my sunglasses to cover the majority of things. But man, in the summertime, I get toasty in my cheeks, my ears, parts where the sunglass ends around my forehead. So like, even though it's not tackle related, guys, just take a little thing of suntan lotion with you right now, because summer always gets me and I can't get away from it. Aside from that, I mean, search tools are the biggest thing. I think as long as you have a topwater, a bomber, like a bigger paddle tail profile, and a variety of light and dark paddle tail, 3 inches, 4 inches, to cover a lot of water, and then maybe dissect with like an Alabama leprechaun that you can work relatively quickly, but slower than a paddle tail traditionally would. General leader setup, still 20-pound leader is a good go-to for everything, 30 if you're going for snook, and some owner twist lock hooks for weedless if you're going to be fishing in the grass. And jig heads, anything from 1/8 ounce to 1/4 ounce is perfectly fine. Even if you're going to work those deeper edges, where if you say, okay, I know, my window of opportunity is diminished, but I didn't have a whole lot of luck. Like I went fishing hard for 3-4 hours. I only caught, maybe 1 or 2 tiny trout, or I didn't get any flounder, any redfish like I was looking for them. And you want to spend some more time out there, another hour, hour and a half. Work those drops, work those edges. It's different everywhere you fish. For me, I have a lot of open, expansive flats over on the east coast of Florida. And those flats are just giant domes of about the same depth. But those flats are going to slowly start dipping. It could even be 1 or 2 foot, like you mentioned, Wyatt, where I can't see the bottom anymore. And even if I don't see bait fish, that little bit of slope, a lot of those fish will move off to just a little bit safer area. And that's when those 3/16 and 1/4 ounce jig heads are going to come into play with a paddle tail. And I'm just bouncing bottom. I might not be casting and straight retrieving and keeping that lure actively moving. Now I'm kind of bouncing bottom a little bit. So have a little bit heavier jig heads with you if you do want to Hail Mary and work those deeper edges. Sometimes I'll spend time and fish the channel, the intercoastal waterway after 9:30, 10 o'clock. And I've caught decent-sized trout. I've caught 20-inch trout bouncing a paddle tail in that intercoastal waterway as the sun gets higher and the water starts warming up. If I just, if I had a rough day on the water and I want to go home knowing that I got a halfway decent fish, the channels are great this time of the year. We did it with Luke not that long ago. We were bouncing paddle tails and the Z-Man shrimp along some channel markers. We got sea bass, got some small trout. I mean, there's triple tail there too. So don't discredit at the end of the day where if you want to have a backup plan, even though you might have missed that sweet window, if you're just like, I just want to get one more cast in, work those deeper edges. Spend some time and bounce a paddle tail on a heavier 1/4 ounce jig head to any structure, a piling. If you can mark a little piece of rubble on a fish finder, or if you know that that slope is dropping, I'd cast parallel to the slope on that edge and start working it parallel back to you, and that's going to increase your chances of getting a good bite here before you get off the water.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Those edges of those flats, especially areas where you know there's going to be good current flow, like if you've got a bunch of little spoil islands or you've got, you know, marsh creeks, things like that, targeting those points where there's that good current flow, usually trout will stay by those areas. Again, that window of opportunity that we've talked about a lot can be a little bit, it's tough once you get out of that, but still later on in the day, and we say later on in the day by like 10, 11 o'clock, which is when you should be probably wrapping up. Otherwise, you're spending a lot of time on the water that's not going to be extremely efficient. Obviously, get out there if that's your only time to fish. But those edges of those channels, we talked about those factors: temperature, DO2, how much the fish can see. Deeper water is cooler. It's going to have higher levels of DO2, especially if you're on your current flow. And the amount of light that is penetrating the surface does dissipate as you get deeper. So it is going to be easier for those fish to feed in that slightly deeper water. So those are all factors to consider. You definitely can still get onto a good bite by 10, 11 o'clock. But the biggest thing we want you guys to take away from this tea time is that maximize your efforts in those dusk and dawn windows. Those are the best times to be out on the water in the summertime. Top water is a killer bait to use. Don't forget your search bait paddle tails, and you can have a really awesome time. So that is going to wrap up this tea time, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you are not an insider and you're watching this video, I do not know what you guys are waiting on. If you want to see live examples of everything we just talked about, you want to get discounts on tackle, we've got it at saltstrong.com. Please join us. We'd love to see you guys in there. You can talk with me and Justin in the community, as well as tens of thousands of other members. It is an awesome community, and we hope to see you guys there soon. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next tea time.
And if you're new to Salt Strong, just know that we're the best online fishing club in America, because we literally guarantee we're going to help you catch more fish while saving time and money on your tackle. We do this by providing you with premium education, a private insider community with thousands of reports published daily, and discounts on the best saltwater fishing tackle in the industry right now. So we're looking forward to seeing you join us in the Salt Strong Insider Club soon, and thanks again for watching.